In a small town, nestled between quiet hills and a whispering river, lived a man named Arthur. Arthur was not an unhappy man, not in the way we might think. He simply saw the world in one particular way. For him, a cloudy day was not a promise of gentle rain for the thirsty earth. It was a sign that the sun had abandoned the sky, leaving behind a gray and lonely world. A missed bus was not a minor inconvenience, but a clear signal that the universe was conspiring against his schedule. He lived in a world painted in shades of disappointment, where every event seemed to confirm his belief that things were, more often than not, just a little bit wrong. Arthur's house was a reflection of his mind. The curtains were always partly drawn, letting in just enough light to see but not enough to feel the warmth of the day. His garden had flowers, but he mostly noticed the weeds that grew stubbornly between them. He would sip his morning coffee and watch his neighbors, seeing not their joy but the effort it must take to maintain it. He believed he was a realist, a man who saw things for what they truly were, without the sweet coating of illusion. He saw the cracks in the pavement, the rust on the gate, and the slow, inevitable march of time that wore everything down. This was his reality, a story he told himself every single day, and like any story told often enough, it became his truth. He believed that happiness was a fleeting visitor, a brief spark in the long, dark night of existence. He didn't understand the laughter of children playing in the street. To him, it was just noise that would soon end in a scraped knee or a squabble over a toy. He saw the world through a single narrow window, and this window showed him a landscape of shadows and subtle letdowns. It was a safe view, in its own way. If you never expect the sun, you are never disappointed by the clouds. His perspective was a fortress he had built around himself, brick by brick, with every small frustration and every minor setback. It protected him from grand disappointments because he never allowed himself to have grand hopes. This fortress was sturdy, its walls thick and its gates barred. He thought he was observing the world as it was, a detached scientific observer of an imperfect system. But he was not just an observer. He was the architect of his own limited world, the curator of a museum where every exhibit was a testament to life's small but certain imperfections. And he had lived there for a very, very long time. One Tuesday, on his usual walk through the town market, Arthur stumbled upon something unusual. Tucked away in a dusty corner of an old antique shop was a small, peculiar object. It was a kaleidoscope, not the kind for children made of plastic and cardboard, but one crafted from dark wood and polished brass. Intrigued by its old-world charm, he picked it up. The shopkeeper, a woman with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories, simply smiled and said, "It shows you things not as they are, but as they could be." Arthur, ever the skeptic, bought it for a small sum, thinking it would be a curious paperweight for his desk. Back in his dimly lit study, he lifted the kaleidoscope to his eye, pointing it at the wilting flower in a vase on his desk. He expected to see a fractured, distorted image of the dying petals, but what he saw instead took his breath away. The fading brown and yellow of the flower exploded into a symphony of geometric patterns, a breathtaking mandala of gold, amber, and deep, earthy tones. The very essence of the flower's decay was transformed into something intricate, something beautiful, something entirely new. He turned it toward the gray, rain-streaked window, and the dreary view shattered into a million dancing diamonds of silver and light. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of quiet wonder. The old, cracked teacup on his shelf became a stunning mosaic of porcelain white and delicate blue fissures. A simple ball of yarn transformed into a swirling galaxy of crimson and scarlet threads. The kaleidoscope did not change the objects themselves. The flower was still wilting, the cup was still cracked, the world outside was still gray. But it changed how he saw them. It took the ordinary, the imperfect, and even the decaying, and it revealed a hidden layer of complexity and beauty that his own eyes had always missed. This simple toy, this tube of mirrors and colored glass, became a powerful metaphor. It was a tool that did not lie, but instead offered a different kind of truth. It suggested that there was more than one way to see the same thing. The world he had known was made of singular, solid facts. A dead flower is a dead flower. But the kaleidoscope whispered a different story. It said that within that one fact, a universe of perspectives was waiting to be discovered. It was a profoundly unsettling idea, a crack in the very foundation of his fortress of realism. The world, he was beginning to suspect, was far stranger and more beautiful than he had ever allowed himself to believe. The next morning, Arthur woke with a sense of unease. The kaleidoscope sat on his nightstand, a silent challenge to his entire way of life. He tried to go about his day as he always had, to see the world through his old, familiar lens. He looked at the morning traffic and tried to feel his usual annoyance at the noise and congestion. He listened to the news and tried to focus on the familiar narrative of problems and conflicts. But something had shifted. A new question echoed in the back of his mind. What would the kaleidoscope show? It was a distracting, persistent thought, like a song you can't get out of your head. He found himself in a constant battle with his own mind. Part of him clung desperately to his old perspective. It was comfortable, it was predictable. It had protected him for so long. This old part of him would point out a flaw, a problem, a reason for pessimism, and say, "See, this is the truth. This is reality." But another, newer part of him, awakened by the brass and glass device, would whisper back, "Is it? Or is it just one pattern among many?" He felt like he was standing between two mirrors, seeing an infinite reflection of his own confusion. This struggle was exhausting, far more than simply accepting the world as a gray and disappointing place. He started carrying the kaleidoscope with him, not to look through it, but as a reminder. When he saw a child crying in the park, his first thought was of sadness and pain. But then he would touch the cool metal of the kaleidoscope in his pocket and force himself to look for another pattern. Perhaps the tears were not just about a fall, but about the comfort of a parent's hug that would follow. When a project at work met a setback, his instinct was to see failure, but the kaleidoscope prompted him to ask, "Is this an end, or is it a chance to find a new, more interesting pattern to solve the problem?" This process was not easy. It felt unnatural, like learning to write with his other hand. His mind, so accustomed to its old pathways, resisted. There were days he grew frustrated and left the kaleidoscope at home, wanting to return to the simple certainty of his old worldview. Seeing the world in a single, unwavering shade of gray was, in its own way, peaceful. The struggle to find the beauty in the cracks, the opportunity in the failure, and the light in the shadows was hard work. It required constant effort, a deliberate choice he had to make, moment by moment, every single day. As weeks turned into months, the struggle began to lessen. The new way of seeing, once a conscious and difficult effort, started to become a habit. Arthur learned that his mind was not a camera, passively recording an objective reality. It was more like a projector, and for years he had been playing the same old movie, a story of subtle disappointment. The kaleidoscope had not given him a new world, but a new film to play. He realized that the power to choose the story had been with him all along. This was a profound revelation, a quiet explosion in the center of his being. The world had not changed at all, but he had. He began to see this principle everywhere. He looked at his neighbors not as people pretending to be happy, but as fellow storytellers, each projecting their own movie onto the screen of reality. The cheerful gardener next door was not ignoring the weeds. He was choosing to focus his story on the blossoms. The young couple across the street was not naive about life's hardships. They were choosing to project a film of hope and partnership. He understood that every mind contained a unique universe, with its own laws of physics, its own light, and its own shadows. His version of reality was not the reality. It was just one of countless possibilities. This understanding brought with it a deep sense of empathy. How could he judge another person's story when his own had been so limited? He started talking to people more, not to observe them, but to listen. He wanted to catch a glimpse of the universe inside their minds, to see the world through their kaleidoscope. He discovered that some saw patterns of adventure, some saw patterns of duty, and others saw patterns of quiet contemplation. None were wrong. They were all just different, beautiful, and complex arrangements of the same pieces of life that he had. Ultimately, Arthur didn't throw away his old lens. He simply added it to a collection of new ones. He understood that sometimes the world is gray, and it is okay to see it that way. But he also knew it could be a dazzling mosaic of light, a complex tapestry of struggle and joy, or a quiet field of gentle color. The key was not to find the one true perspective, but to hold the freedom to choose. He had learned that happiness is not